She knelt beside the man she was supposed to love and whispered the most ruthless thing he had ever heard. He was bleeding. He was broken. And she thought he couldn't hear her. But Nathaniel Whitmore heard every single word. And in that frozen moment, lying still as death on a Yorkshire hillside, he made a choice that would unravel everything: his engagement, his pride, and the carefully constructed life he thought he wanted. Some truths don't arrive gently. They arrive the way carriages crash, fast, violent, and impossible to walk away from unchanged. If you've ever loved someone who never truly saw you stay with us, this story is for you. England, Yorkshire, February 1817. The morning the carriage broke apart on the Harrowfield Road, the sky was the color of old pewter flat cold and offering nothing. Nathaniel Whitmore had traveled that road 100 times. He knew every stone, every rut, every place where the frozen earth swelled up beneath the wheels in winter. He was not a careless man. He had never been careless. But the rear axle gave without warning. There was a crack, sharp and final, like a pistol shot, and then the world tilted sideways. The horses screamed. The carriage shuddered, lurched, and then dropped hard to the left, and Nathaniel felt the bench vanish beneath him as he was thrown forward, his shoulder catching the doorframe before the whole vehicle rolled. He didn't remember landing. He remembered the silence after. That particular silence, the kind that follows catastrophic sound, felt enormous. It pressed down on him like weight. He could hear his own breathing, ragged and shallow. He could feel snow beneath his left hand. He could feel something warm running down the side of his face. And then he heard voices. Eleanor. Good God, is he? Don't shout, Harriet. That was Eleanor's voice. Composed, measured. Of course it was. Eleanor Ashford. Pemberton. 26-year-old daughter of the late Viscount Ashford, affianced to Nathaniel Whitmore for 11 months. She had a voice that never trembled. Even now, even here with the carriage overturned and her intended lying motionless in the snow. Eleanor Pemberton's voice was the voice of a woman managing a social inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Nathaniel recognized distantly that he should open his eyes. He should speak. He should let them know he was conscious and breathing and largely intact, though his ribs ached and his head was singing. He didn't. He wasn't sure later what stopped him. Instinct, perhaps. Some primitive awareness, the same thing that makes an animal go still in the presence of a predator. Something whispered to him. Wait. Listen. Do not move. He lay still. He's breathing, Harriet said. She was Eleanor's cousin, a nervous, fluttery woman of 30 who had joined the party as chaperone. Her voice was unsteady. Eleanor, he's bleeding from his temple. We need to send for the doctor. We need to... Yes. A pause. The sound of footsteps on frozen ground, careful, deliberate footsteps. Eleanor moving closer. Yes, send Thomas for Dr. Aldridge. Go now. The hurried crunch of Harriet's footsteps retreating toward the road, and then silence again. Nathaniel could feel Eleanor's presence. Close. Very close. He heard the soft rustle of her skirts as she crouched near him. He felt, or imagined he felt, the displacement of cold air as she bent toward him. He waited. He waited for her hand on his face. He waited for her voice to crack with fear. He waited for the one moment in 11 months of careful, polished courtship where Eleanor Pemberton might simply be frightened, raw human. Instead, he heard her breathe. One breath. Controlled. Then she spoke not to him, but quietly to herself, or perhaps to the empty hillside. A whisper, low and precise. His estate will be impossible to replace. 3 seconds of silence. Do not let anyone know he heard us. And Nathaniel Whitmore, bleeding in the snow, lying completely still, felt something inside his chest go very, very cold. Not from the weather. He kept his eyes closed for another 20 minutes. He had plenty of time to think. Harriet returned with Thomas the coachman, and together they managed to ease Nathaniel onto a blanket. Eleanor directed the effort efficiently. She told Thomas where to position his hands. She told Harriet to stop wringing hers. She organized the extraction of an injured man from a snow-covered hillside, the way another woman might organize a dinner party with precision, with authority, and with no visible emotion whatsoever. "Carefully," she said when Thomas shifted Nathaniel's weight. "His shoulder. Watch the shoulder." She noticed the shoulder. Nathaniel filed that away somewhere. The fact that she had assessed his injuries, had noticed the angle of his arm, had made the correct practical observation. Eleanor Pemberton was not stupid. She was not even unkind exactly. She was simply calculating, and that word, once it arrived in his mind, would not leave. Calculating. I thought about the 11 months. He thought about the way Eleanor held herself at dinners, straight-spined, gracious, saying exactly the right thing to exactly the right people. He thought about how she never put a foot wrong, never laughed too loudly, never expressed an opinion that might offend, never needed anything. He had admired that. He had called it poise. He had called it breeding. He was now beginning to wonder if it was something else entirely. Thomas and a footman from a neighboring property carried him back to the road, and then, after considerable logistical maneuvering, back to Whitmore Hall in a borrowed cart. Nathaniel allowed himself to remain limp and unresponsive throughout, though he was fully conscious and growing more so by the minute, his mind working with the cold efficiency of a man who has just received information he cannot unreceive. When they laid him in his own bed at last, Dr. Aldridge arrived within the hour, examined him briskly, and declared him bruised, but fundamentally sound. A cut to the temple, 2 bruised ribs, nothing broken. He may sleep deeply for some hours. Aldridge told Eleanor in the corridor outside. Head injuries are unpredictable. Keep him quiet. Of course, Eleanor said. Thank you, doctor. The door opened. Nathaniel heard her enter. He kept his breathing slow, kept his face slack, kept his eyes closed. He heard Eleanor cross the room. He heard her stop at the foot of the bed. He heard her stand there for a long moment. She simply stood there, and he wondered for one desperate instant if this was where she cracked, if this was where she came apart. You have the most inconvenient timing, Eleanor said quietly. Not to him, he was supposed to be unconscious. To herself, perhaps. To the room. Then she left. Nathaniel did not tell anyone what he had heard. Not that first day. Not that first week. He recovered with what his housekeeper called admirable stoicism, and what his man of business called predictable stubbornness. He sat up on the 3rd day. He walked the East Wing on the 5th. By the 2nd week, he was at his desk working through correspondence with the single-minded focus of a man who needs very badly to think about something else. But he was also watching. He watched Eleanor the way he had never watched her before, not with a suitor's admiring gaze, but with a naturalist's eye. The way a man watches something in its habitat, learning its patterns. She came to call every other day. She sat in the parlor. She asked after his health in exactly the right tone, warm, but not excessive, concerned, but not clinging. She brought books from her uncle's library because she knew he liked to read. She consulted with Mrs. Hargrove, his housekeeper, about the menus for his convalescence without overstepping her place as a guest. She was perfect. And Nathaniel, watching her, felt the first cold fingers of something close to grief. Because she was performing. He could see it now that he knew what to look for. The slight delay before each smile. The way her eyes tracked the room when she thought no one was watching. The careful economy of her warmth, distributed in precise measures to precisely the right people. To him, she gave the correct amount of concern. Not an ounce more. And the worst part, the part that sat in him like a stone, was that she wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't vicious. She wasn't even lying exactly. She genuinely wished him a speedy recovery, he suspected, because a speedy recovery suited her considerably better than the alternative. She was practical. She was rational. She was everything a sensible man should want in a wife of her station. And Nathaniel Whitmore, sitting in his library, with a book open and unread in his hands, slowly came to understand that he had never loved her either. He had loved the idea of her. The picture she made Eleanor Pemberton on his arm at his table in his world. A woman who would manage Whitmore Hall with flawless competence and reflect credit on his name. He had been shopping for an ornament, and she had been shopping for a house. They deserved each other, perhaps. The thought brought him no comfort whatsoever. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, the 12th day after the accident, that Nathaniel noticed Eleanor Ashford for the first time. Not Eleanor Pemberton, his fiancée. Eleanor Ashford, the other Eleanor. He had been vaguely aware of her existence for years. She was the poor relation, the one who lived with the Pembrokes at Ashford Grange after her father died and left nothing behind but debts and a crumbling property in the north. She had been educated well enough, dressed plainly enough, and ignored comprehensively enough that she had become part of the wallpaper of every drawing room Nathaniel had ever attended. She was 23, quiet, unremarkable. Or so he had always thought. How was sitting by the east window. When she arrived with Eleanor, she often came as companion because Eleanor did not like to travel unchaperoned, and Harriet had gone back to her mother in Derbyshire. Eleanor Ashford carried a basket covered with a cloth, and she said nothing until Eleanor Pemberton had swept into the parlor to greet Mrs. Hargrove about something, and then she turned and looked directly at Nathaniel. "How is your head?" she asked. Not "how are you feeling," which was what everyone asked. Not "are you quite recovered," which was what Eleanor Pemberton asked every other day, like a question from a handbook on proper fiancé conduct. "How is your head?" Nathaniel blinked. "Better," he said. "The headaches are less frequent." "Good." She crossed the room, set the basket on the table beside him, and lifted the cloth. Underneath a small jar of something amber-colored, a bundle of dried something or other, tied with string, and a book. Mrs. Garrett at the village apothecary says willow bark tea helps with persistent headaches after a head injury. I brought some. And the lavender is for... She hesitated, almost seemed embarrassed. It helps some people sleep, if you're having trouble sleeping. Nathaniel stared at the basket. He looked up at her. Eleanor Ashford was not looking back at him. She was already moving toward the window, giving him room, not requiring anything of him for having brought the gift. Her face was turned away. She had a rather remarkable profile, he noticed. He wasn't sure he'd noticed it before. "That was thoughtful," he said. "It's practical." She glanced at him sideways. "You're not sleeping well. Anyone can see it." "You can see it. You're rubbing your left eye." She almost smiled, almost not quite. "You do that when you're tired and pretending not to be. You've done it since you were 17, I remember." Nathaniel went still. "You remember that. You used to do it at the Davenport assemblies." Her voice was light, careful. "I was 14. I stood in the corner and watched everyone because there was nothing else to do, and I had an extraordinary amount of time on my hands." Now she did smile, small, self-deprecating, a little sad. "I notice things. It's a habit, not always a useful one." "On the contrary," Nathaniel said slowly, "I find it remarkably useful." She looked at him properly, then just for a moment, just long enough for him to see the question in her eyes. Then Eleanor Pemberton's voice rang from the corridor, bright and carrying, asking Mrs. Hargrove about the linen situation, and Eleanor Ashford stepped back, smoothed her skirts, and became wallpaper again. Nathaniel looked at the basket on the table. Willow bark, lavender. A book. He picked it up. It was a volume of Cowper's poems. She'd tucked a small slip of paper inside the front cover, just a brief note in neat, unpretentious handwriting. "Cowper wrote a great deal about recovery. I thought it might suit." He sat with the book in his hands for a long time after they left. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel began to pay attention in a different way. He started noticing where Eleanor Ashford was in every room, because she had a habit of positioning herself where she could see everything and be seen by no one. Corners, window seats, the end of the table farthest from the center of conversation. He started noticing what she did, because she did a great deal that no one acknowledged. She was the one who quietly refilled Mrs. Hargrove's tea when the housekeeper's hands were full. She was the one who retrieved Eleanor Pemberton's dropped glove without being asked and without drawing attention to the retrieval. She was the one who at dinner at Ashford Grange steered the conversation away from a topic that was visibly distressing to old Colonel Pembroke with a deftness so subtle that only Nathaniel watching caught it. He started noticing what she said, which was rarely much and almost never in company. but what she said precisely and without waste. He asked her once in a brief, unobserved exchange in the Grange library, while Eleanor Pemberton consulted with her aunt in the next room. He asked her what she thought of the new drainage system being proposed on the eastern farms. He expected polite ignorance. He expected a ladylike demurral. She told him exactly what she thought in 4 clear sentences, and she was right about all of it. "How do you know about the drainage situation?" he asked. "I asked the tenants." She was pulling a book from the shelf, not looking at him. "When I walked down to the village last Thursday. People will tell you things if you ask them and actually listen to the answer." "You went to the village on Thursday." "I go most Thursdays." She paused. "I help Mrs. Garrett with her accounts. Her eyesight is failing, and her nephew is useless with numbers." "Does Eleanor know you do that?" A beat of silence. "Eleanor has a great many things to think about," she said carefully. "The village accounts are not among them." She pulled the book from the shelf and left the library. Nathaniel stood there for a moment alone among the shelves and understood with sudden and uncomfortable clarity that he had been blind. Not just to Eleanor Ashford. To everything. The thing about blindness, real blindness, the kind that isn't physical, is that once you begin to see, you cannot stop. You cannot choose to go back. Nathaniel began to notice too what Eleanor Pemberton didn't do. She did not ask questions, not real ones. She performed inquiry. "How are the tenants this season? How goes the north pasture?" with the skilled disinterest of someone who already knew that the answers didn't matter. What mattered was that she had asked. What mattered was that it looked right. She did not laugh. She smiled constantly and beautifully, but she did not laugh, not the real kind, not the kind that escapes before you can stop it. Every expression she wore was chosen. She never once in 11 months said anything to him that surprised him. He had thought that was compatibility. He was beginning to understand it was performance. He didn't hate her for it. He wanted to. Perhaps it would have been easier, cleaner. But Eleanor Pemberton was not a villain. She was a woman of her time and her class, doing what women of her time and class were trained to do: secure her position, secure her future, secure the only power available to her. He understood it. He still couldn't marry her. The night he finally admitted that to himself fully, without qualification, he was sitting in the dark library at Whitmore Hall. At 11:30, the fire burned down to embers, the book on his knee unread. He thought about the whisper on the hill. His estate will be impossible to replace. He thought about Eleanor Ashford saying without ceremony or flattery, "You do that when you're tired," and pretending not to be. I thought about the willow bark tea and the Cowper poems and the slip of paper in careful handwriting. He thought about a 14-year-old girl standing in the corner of an assembly room, watching, noticing, filing things away, not because she was scheming, not because she was calculating, but simply because she was present in a way that most people never were. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he called for candles, sat down at his desk, and began to write letters. What he discovered in the month that followed required only asking the right people the right questions. He asked his solicitor. He asked his man of business. He asked very carefully, very obliquely, certain old friends of the late Viscount Ashford. The picture that assembled itself was not dramatic. It was quiet, like she was. 3 years ago, when the Whitmore estate accounts were in genuine disorder, when his father's death had left a tangle of investments and debts that took 18 months to sort through, the Pembroke family accounts had been the only stable credit in the county. Everyone knew this. What was less known was why they were stable given old Colonel Pembroke's legendary disorganization. It was the accounts, the village accounts, the tenant ledgers, the household books. Someone had been maintaining them with quiet, consistent precision for 3 years. The Colonel's solicitor, a Mr. Granville, who had known Eleanor Ashford since she arrived at the Grange as a girl of 16, told Nathaniel with an air of someone relieved to finally acknowledge an open secret. "Miss Ashford has managed those books since your father died, Mr. Whitmore. She saw the trouble the county was in, and she simply began. She asked me once if I thought it was impertinent. I told her it was the most sensible thing anyone in the county had done in a decade." "Did anyone else know?" Nathaniel asked. "The Colonel does not quite follow numbers," Granville said carefully. Miss Eleanor. He paused, distinguishing between the two Eleanors with practiced ease. Miss Pemberton has other concerns. No, no one knew particularly. Why not? Nathaniel asked. Why didn't she ever say? I asked her the same thing. Granville folded his hands on his desk. She said, because it needs doing, not discussing. Nathaniel left the solicitor's office and stood on the street outside for a long moment. Because it needs doing, not discussing. He turned that sentence over and over in his mind all the way home. He thought about what it meant, what it said about a woman who had watched an estate teetering toward difficulty and had simply fixed it quietly without credit, without acknowledgement, without even the small pleasure of being thanked. I thought about what it meant that he had never in all his years of moving through the same rooms as Eleanor Ashford thought to ask. He arrived home, went directly to the stables, saddled his own horse to the visible alarm of his head groom, and rode out into the late afternoon without telling anyone where he was going. He rode to the far north field where the new drainage work was beginning. He sat on his horse and looked at it. And he thought, what else have I missed? 2 weeks later, on a gray March afternoon, Eleanor Ashford was in the Grange's small garden, cutting back the dead growth from the rose beds. She wore old gloves and a plain dark dress. Her hair was not fashionably arranged. She had dirt on her left sleeve. She didn't hear Nathaniel arrive, or if she did, she gave no sign. She kept working methodical and unhurried until he stopped a few yards away and said, I owe you an apology. That stopped her. She straightened slowly and turned to look at him. Her face gave nothing away, which he now recognized as its own kind of information. Eleanor Ashford had spent years keeping her face carefully still. She had learned somewhere along the way that her expressions were not safe to show. Do you? She said. I do. He wasn't sure precisely how to say it. He had rehearsed words, and they all seemed inadequate, so he abandoned them. I've been walking through this county for 31 years, and I have seen almost none of it. I've looked at the right things and missed everything that mattered. I've looked at you and seen... He stopped. I've looked at you and not seen you at all. I am sorry for that. A long silence. The wind moved through the dead rose canes. That's a remarkable thing to say. Her voice was cautious still, particularly for a man who is engaged to be married. I am aware of the complication. Are you? Not a question. Her eyes were steady on him, measuring. Mr. Whitmore, what is it you actually want to say to me? He looked at her, this quiet, unremarkable, wholly remarkable woman in her old gloves and her earth-stained sleeve, and he said it plainly without dressing it up. I think I have spent a year preparing to make a very serious mistake. And I think you are the only person in Yorkshire honest enough to tell me so, if I asked. Eleanor Ashford looked at him for a long, careful moment. Then she pulled off one garden glove finger by finger and folded it over her hand. You'd better come inside, she said. This will take more than a few minutes. And she turned and walked toward the house. Nathaniel stood in the garden for a half a second alone in the cold, with the dead roses and the gray sky and the first real feeling of possibility he had known in a very long time. Then he followed her. If you felt something just now, if you've ever been the one in the corner, the one who was seen last, the one who gave and was never quite counted, stay with us, subscribe and hit the bell, because Nathaniel Whitmore is only beginning to understand the scale of what he's about to lose. And this story is far from over. Eleanor Ashford made tea the way she did everything else, without fuss, without ceremony, without asking whether he took sugar or simply assuming he did. She set the cup in front of him and waited. Nathaniel wrapped both hands around it and said nothing for a moment. The Grange's small sitting room was warm at least. A fire. 2 chairs angled toward it. A stack of books on the side table that he was fairly certain were hers, and not the Colonel's, a treatise on agricultural reform. A volume of letters, something in French. You read French, he said. My father insisted. She sat across from him, her own cup balanced on her knee, her posture careful and still. He believed an educated woman was more useful than a decorative one. He was not, as it turned out, representative of his class. A pause, short and dry. Neither was he particularly good with money. But he was right about French. He sounds like someone worth knowing. How was? Her chin lifted slightly. He died when I was 15 and left me to figure out the rest on my own. So. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. You said this would take more than a few minutes. I'm listening. Nathaniel set down his tea. He had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that Eleanor Ashford was not going to make this easy for him, and that she was entirely right not to. I spoke with Mr. Granville, he said. She went very still. He told me about the accounts. Nathaniel kept his voice level, kept his eyes on her face. 3 years, Eleanor. 3 years of maintaining the county books, the tenant ledgers, the household finances quietly without credit, without anyone, without me ever knowing or asking why the Pembroke household was solvent when every other estate in the region was struggling. The stillness in her face shifted not into vulnerability, not yet, but into something cautious and watchful. The expression of a person who has learned not to trust the word thank you because it has so rarely come without a condition attached. Mr. Granville speaks too freely, she said. Mr. Granville speaks admiringly. There's a difference. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you even once allow anyone to know? Because it would have changed things. Changed things how? She looked at him directly, and there was something almost impatient in it. The look of a woman explaining something that ought to be obvious to anyone paying attention. If I had told people, it would have become a matter of negotiation. Colonel Pembroke would have felt indebted. Eleanor would have felt that I was positioning myself, making a claim. She paused. And frankly, Mr. Whitmore, a woman who is useful in private and quiet about it, is tolerated. A woman who announces her usefulness is threatening. I learned that lesson very early. Nathaniel absorbed that. He absorbed it slowly, because the full weight of it, the pragmatic, bone-deep understanding. It represented the years of invisible accommodation, took a moment to settle. That is the most quietly devastating thing I've heard in a long time, he said. It's simply true. She looked away into the fire, and her voice remained even, but something in her shoulders shifted. Not much, barely perceptible. The kind of shift that means a person is working to hold something in place. Why are you here, Mr. Whitmore, truly? He had been asking himself that question all the way from the solicitor's office. He had been asking it in the saddle and in the stable yard and standing in the dead garden watching her work. Because I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, he said. And I've spent 8 weeks trying to convince myself it didn't mean what I knew it meant. And then I spent 3 weeks finding out everything it meant. And now I'm sitting in this room, which I should have sat in years ago, talking to a woman I should have talked to years ago, and I am trying very badly, I realize, to explain that I am not the man I thought I was. The silence that followed was long enough to be uncomfortable. Then Eleanor Ashford said, "What did you hear?" He told her. He told her all of it, the carriage, the axle, the hillside. The moment he decided to keep still. Eleanor Pemberton's footsteps in the snow. The voice precise, quiet, calibrated, saying words that no woman should say, beside a bleeding man she claimed to love. Eleanor Ashford listened without interrupting. Her face was turned slightly away from him, her cup very still in her hands. When he finished, the fire popped once and settled. She said that, Eleanor Ashford said finally, not a question. She said that. Another silence. Longer this time. I've known Eleanor Pemberton for 6 years, she said slowly. I have watched her in a great many situations. I have always known that she was practical. She stopped. Chose her next words with visible care. But I would not have predicted. I did not think she was that cold. No. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. Neither did I. What are you going to do? That's the question, isn't it? He sat back. I can't simply accuse her of it. I have no proof beyond my own memory. I can't end the engagement without cause, not in a way that doesn't damage her, and whatever she is, whatever she said, I don't want to destroy her socially. She would never recover. Eleanor Ashford looked at him steadily. You're protecting her, she said. Even now. I'm trying to be fair. It's not the same thing. Isn't it? There was something sharp in it, not cruel but honest in a way that landed like a clean blade. You heard what she said. You know what it means. And your first instinct is to manage the damage to her reputation, not your own. Not... She stopped herself. Nathaniel watched her stop herself. Not what? He asked. She shook her head, set her cup down on the table beside her with a small final sound. This is not my situation, she said. I should not be. Eleanor. He hadn't meant to use her name. It came out without forethought, plain and direct, and it stopped her, the way a hand on a door stops a door from closing. What were you going to say? She was quiet for a moment. The fire between them. The afternoon going gray outside the window. I was going to say, she said carefully, that your first instinct was not to ask who was actually there, on that hillside. Who was there when everyone else had gone? Who came back? She met his eyes briefly, then looked away. But that is none of my concern. Nathaniel thought about the hillside. He thought about Eleanor Pemberton crouching close, assessing, calculating, and then Harriet's retreating footsteps, and then the silence. He thought about the first real moment of care he'd received in those weeks of recovery, a basket on a side table, willow bark tea and lavender, and a book of poems with a note tucked inside. He thought about who had brought that basket. You were there, he said. I'm always there. Her voice was very quiet. That's rather the point, isn't it? I'm always there, and no one ever. She caught herself again, pressed her lips together. Forgive me. I'm speaking out of turn. You're speaking honestly. He leaned forward again. Please, don't stop. She looked at him for a long moment. The careful stillness in her face was doing something different now, not hiding exactly, but holding a decision. He could see it, the precise moment a person chooses whether to trust or retreat. She chose to trust. Do you know what I have watched for 3 years? She said. I have watched you look straight through me at every assembly, every dinner, every county meeting. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just I wasn't there for you. I was furniture, and I understand it. I do, it's simply how it is. I have no fortune, no beauty worth remarking on, no powerful family connections, nothing to make me visible in the way that matters. So I watched, and I managed the accounts, and I helped Mrs. Garrett with her ledgers, and I was useful, which is its own kind of life. She paused. But I will tell you something, Mr. Whitmore, and I'll ask you to hear it honestly. You did not come here today because you suddenly discovered I am worthy of attention. You came here because someone else disappointed you, and I would like to know the difference. The words hit him like a physical thing. Not because they were unkind, because they were exactly precisely right. He sat with them for a moment, sat with the discomfort of them, because the truth was, she was correct. The sequence was wrong. He had not woken up one morning and thought Eleanor Ashford deserves to be seen. He had heard a whisper in the snow, and it had cracked open something in him, and he had looked around for solid ground and found her, and she deserved better than to be someone's fallback. You're right, he said. You're completely right, and I'm not going to insult you by arguing otherwise. She hadn't expected that. Something flickered across her face, surprise quickly managed. Then what? She said. Then what I am going to do, Nathaniel said, is sit here in this room for as long as you'll permit me. And I'm going to ask you questions I should have asked years ago. And I'm going to listen to the answers. And I am not going to pretend that makes up for any of it, or that it earns me anything. I'm going to do it because you deserve to be talked to, not managed, and because... He stopped, looked at his hands. Because you are the most genuinely honest person I've met in years. And I'm finding that I can't breathe very well without honesty at the moment. The fire settled again. Outside the light was going. Eleanor Ashford picked up her cup, looked into it. Then she looked up at him. Ask your questions then, she said. And so he did. He asked about her father, and she told him without sentiment, but not without feeling, about a man who had loved books more than balance sheets and paid the price for it, and who had nonetheless given her something invaluable, the belief that her mind was worth using. He asked about the accounts, and she walked him through 3 years of decisions with the brisk practicality of someone who had been doing real work while everyone else was performing it. And twice he stopped her to ask a follow-up question because the answer genuinely surprised him, and both times he saw something ease slightly in her expression, the way a door eases open when the hinge stops sticking. He asked carefully why she had never married. There were no appropriate suitors, she said. He asked what made a suitor appropriate. She looked at him with that almost smile. One who was interested in marrying me, she said, rather than the idea of acquiring a competent woman cheaply. That's a brutal assessment. I've had 6 years to develop it. Has there ever been anyone, he asked, who was interested in you actually, you rather than the idea? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Once, she said. A long time ago. He was a young man in the next county, a solicitor's son. He was clever and kind and had absolutely no money and no prospects, and Colonel Pembroke would have been mortified. She paused. He married someone else 3 years ago. Someone sensible. I hope they're happy. Were you in love with him? I was interested in him. She set her cup down. I think I was mostly in love with the idea of being interesting to someone, of being seen. It's a very dangerous thing to be starved of, Mr. Whitmore. Being seen. She said it quietly, plainly, without accusation, but it landed on him like an accusation all the same. He heard it the way he had heard the whisper on the hill, with his whole body, with a stillness that was not calm, but something closer to recognition. I know, he said. I'm beginning to understand that I have been seen very selectively my entire life. People see the estate, the name, the account balance, and I have been, he paused, selecting accordingly. Choosing people who reflected those things back to me, calling it compatibility. And now I'm sitting in this room and I've been here 2 hours and you haven't once mentioned Whitmore Hall. She blinked. Then, genuinely not performed, not managed, she laughed. It was a short laugh. Quiet. A little startled. But real, entirely unmistakably real, the kind that escapes before a person can stop it. Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatic, not a thunderclap. Something quieter, more fundamental, a realignment, like a compass finding north. When she recovered, she looked slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry. That was... Don't apologize. His voice was very firm. That was the first real thing that's happened in this room in years, I'd wager. Don't apologize for it. She looked at him. Really looked the way she had looked at him once before in the library at the Grange, when she'd told him about the drainage system, her eyes measuring and direct. What are you going to do? She said again. About Eleanor. And he understood from the way she said it. The careful neutrality. The precise steadiness that this question was carrying a great deal of weight that she was not going to let show. I'm going to end it, he said. Not today. Not in a way that humiliates her publicly. But I'm going to end it. And I'm going to do it honestly. She'll be furious. Yes. Her family will be worse. I expect so. And what about you? She tilted her head slightly. What happens to Nathaniel Whitmore after he ends an engagement to the most eligible woman in Yorkshire? I imagine, he said, that he finds out what he actually wants, instead of what looks good. He held her gaze. Which is a novel experience. I'm told it improves with practice. She was quiet for a moment. Then, this is a very unusual conversation. I know. You should probably go. It's getting dark. The Colonel will be home for dinner, and he'll wonder, Eleanor. He stood. She stood too automatically by instinct, a woman so accustomed to adjusting to other people's movements that her body did it before her mind caught up. He reached out and very briefly touched her hand. Not her sleeve. Her hand. Thank you. For listening. For being honest. For... He stopped. For the willow bark tea. Weeks ago. She looked down at where his hand had touched hers. Then up at him. It was practical, she said. Everything with you is practical. Yes. The almost smile again. It's how I survive. He left the Grange as the last gray light was leaving the sky. He rode home through the cold, through the dark fields past the drainage work on the north pasture and the stone walls that divided the tenant's land from his. And he thought about a woman standing in a corner with too much to notice and nowhere to put it. I thought about what it cost to be invisible for years. To keep giving without anyone tallying the gift. to manage the world quietly from the margins and never be invited toward the center. He thought about the whisper on the hill. And he thought some things you hear for a reason. Some silences broken cannot be rebuilt. Back at Whitmore Hall, he ate dinner alone as he usually did, and afterward he sat at his desk for 2 hours composing a letter that he did not send. He wrote it 3 times. The third version was a single page, and it said simply, plainly, without ornament, everything that needed to be said to Eleanor Pemberton. He folded it, sealed it, placed it in the top drawer of the desk. Not tonight. Not without speaking to her first. He owed her that. But the decision was made. He had made it. He realized 8 weeks ago, lying still in the snow on the Harrowfield Road, listening to a voice that didn't know he was listening. He'd just needed time to understand what the decision meant. That was the thing about clarity. It didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated day by day, conversation by conversation, small truth by small truth. Until one evening, you sat at a desk and knew precisely where you were, and precisely how wrong you had been, and precisely with a steadiness that surprised you, what came next. What came next was not comfortable. What came next would require him to be the kind of man he had never particularly practiced, being honest, direct, willing to absorb damage rather than deflect it. Nathaniel Whitmore looked at the sealed letter in the drawer. He looked at the window where the night was full and dark and completely indifferent. He thought about Eleanor Ashford saying, "I'm always there." That's rather the point. He closed the drawer. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in weeks, which was, he recognized with a grim humor, probably the lavender. But only probably. The morning came gray and cold as Yorkshire mornings did in March, with frost on the glass, and the smell of coal smoke and horses, and the particular kind of silence that belongs to a large house occupied by one person who has finally stopped pretending everything is fine. Mrs. Hargrove brought his breakfast and noted in the careful way of a woman who had run his household for 15 years that he seemed different. "Different how?" he asked. "Quieter," she said. "But not the sad kind of quiet. The thinking kind." She refilled his coffee and added with the absolute authority of a woman who has earned the right to say whatever she pleases, "It suits you, sir." He looked up at her. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "how long have you known that Miss Pemberton and I were—" He paused, selected the word with care. "Unsuited." She did not even pretend to consider it. "Since Christmas, sir," she said, "when she corrected my arrangement of the table flowers in front of the staff and then told you they were lovely." He stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "It's not my place to say anything." She collected his plate. "It is, however, my place to observe, which I have done, thoroughly." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "If it's of any interest, and I have no opinion either way, Miss Ashford remembered to ask how my sister's hip was getting on last Tuesday, when she came with Miss Pemberton. It was our second meeting. She asked because she remembered I'd mentioned it at the first one." She paused at the door. "Just an observation, sir. Good morning." She left. Nathaniel sat alone at the breakfast table, surrounded by the cool, clear fact of what everyone around him had apparently known, and he had needed a carriage accident to discover. He picked up his coffee. He thought about Eleanor Ashford, remembering a housekeeper's sister's hip. About 3 years of accounts kept quietly and correctly. About a woman who noticed which way he rubbed his eye when he was tired. He set the coffee down. He reached for paper and a pen. He wrote a short note, not the letter in the drawer, not the one to Eleanor Pemberton. A different one, shorter, 4 lines. "I owe you the continuation of an honest conversation. If you are willing, and I make no assumption, I will call at Ashford Grange tomorrow at 2 o'clock. If you are not willing, I will understand entirely and not trouble you again. N.W." He blotted it, sealed it, handed it to Thomas at the door with instructions to deliver it to Miss Eleanor Ashford. Not Miss Pemberton, Miss Ashford, before noon. Then he went to find Eleanor Pemberton. Not tomorrow, not after a letter. Today. Because she deserved that. Because it needed doing. And because the longer he waited, the more distance accumulated between who he had been and who he was trying imperfectly and too late to become. Eleanor Pemberton received him in the formal sitting room at Pembroke House, the good room, the room for visitors who mattered. which told him she had been expecting something and had dressed the moment accordingly. She wore blue. She looked exactly like what she was, a beautiful woman in complete control of her presentation. "Nathaniel," she said, not quite a greeting, more like a position taken. "Eleanor." He did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, and he said without preamble, "I owe you a conversation. I should have insisted on months ago. I would like to have it now if you'll allow me." She folded her hands in her lap. "Go ahead." "I'm ending our engagement." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor Pemberton did not cry. She did not raise her voice. What she did, and he would remember this for a long time, was blink once slowly, like a calculation being run and a result being processed. "I see," she said. "I want you to know that I don't intend to give any account of my reasons publicly. As far as the county knows, we came to this decision mutually and amicably. Your reputation will not suffer." "My reputation?" She said it with a flatness that almost cracked something in her composure. "That's what concerns you, among other things." "And what are the other things, Nathaniel?" Steadier now, back in command. "What is the actual reason?" He looked at her. He thought about the hill. He thought about telling her and decided against it. Not to protect himself, because it would only be weaponized. She would spend months dissecting it, reassembling it, turning it into something she could use or deny. He knew that now. "I believe we want different things," he said. "And I believe we have been, both of us, less than honest about what those things are." Her eyes sharpened. "That is very carefully phrased." "Yes." A pause. She was thinking. He could see it, the rapid, precise assessment. The map being redrawn. He had always admired that about her, the intelligence beneath the performance. He admired it still. "Is there someone else?" she asked. The question landed cleanly. He took a breath. "Not in the way you mean," he said. "No," which was true. He had sent a 4-line note and received nothing back yet. He had sat in a small sitting room for 2 hours and had an honest conversation and touched a hand briefly and been laughed at, genuinely laughed at for the first time in recent memory. That was not a love story. That was a beginning of something that might become one if he could manage to be worthy of it. Eleanor Pemberton held his gaze for a long moment. And then quietly, without warning, without any of the careful management he had expected, something shifted in her face. Not grief exactly, something more complicated. "I did care about you," she said. "In my way. I want you to know that." "I know." He did know. It was precisely what made it so sad. "I cared about you too, in mine." She looked away. She pressed her lips together. When she looked back, she was composed again, entirely, perfectly composed, and the moment was gone. "I'll speak to my aunt," she said. "We'll manage the story." "Thank you." He left Pembroke House at 11:30, stood in the cold outside and breathed. Thomas returned from Ashford Grange at 1:15. The reply was 3 lines. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock is agreeable. I make no assumptions either. E.A." Nathaniel read it twice, folded it carefully, put it in his coat pocket. He went back inside. He had a great deal to do, and very little of it, for the first time in a long time, had anything to do with appearances. The note was 3 lines. He had read it a dozen times. There was something about the precision of it. "I make no assumptions either," that told him more than 3 lines ought to. Eleanor Ashford had spent years learning not to want things too openly. She had learned to hold expectations at a distance, the way you hold a candle in the wind, cupped, careful, protecting the flame from your own breath. He understood that now. He hadn't 3 months ago. 3 months ago, he wouldn't have known what to look for. He arrived at Ashford Grange at 2 o'clock exactly. Not early, which would have seemed eager in a way that might have frightened her. Not late, which would have suggested he hadn't decided. 2 o'clock on the mark, because she was a woman who noticed things, and he wanted her to notice that. Colonel Pembroke answered the door himself, which was unusual, and regarded Nathaniel with the vaguely puzzled expression of a man who had just learned that his household was more complicated than he'd thought, and wasn't quite sure how to reorganize the information. "Whitmore," the colonel said. "Heard you and Eleanor, that is our Eleanor, that is." He stopped recalibrated. Come in, come in. She's in the back sitting room. The back sitting room. Not the formal one. The small one with the books and the fire where Eleanor Ashford actually lived her life, as opposed to the front rooms where life was performed for visitors. She was standing when he came in, not waiting exactly, but not seated either, as though she had been moving and had stopped when she heard his step in the corridor. She had a letter in her hand. She put it down on the table without looking at where it landed. You came, she said. I said I would. People say a great many things. A breath. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Nathaniel. She paused. Nathaniel. Testing the sound of it. Sit down. He sat. She sat across from him in the same chair as before, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the fire did what fires do, and the room settled around them like a room that had been waiting to have this particular conversation. I want to ask you something, she said, before this goes further, and I need you to answer honestly, not carefully. All right. What happened with Eleanor Pemberton? He had expected the question. He had thought writing over about exactly how much to tell her. He had decided on the way that the answer was all of it. So he told her. He told her about the formal sitting room, the blue dress, the absolute stillness of a woman receiving news she had perhaps been expecting. He told her about Eleanor Pemberton's one moment of something real. I did care about you in my way, and how it had made everything both better and worse simultaneously. He told her that Eleanor Pemberton was already managing the story efficiently and without visible damage, and that the county would know by the end of the week and have forgotten the specifics by the end of the month. Eleanor Ashford listened to all of it without moving. When he finished, she said she cared about you. Yes. Do you believe her? He thought about it honestly. I believe she cared about what we were together. The picture of it. I'm not sure she ever cared about who I was when nobody was watching. A long pause. Something moved across her face, recognition perhaps. The particular recognition of someone who understands exactly what it means to be unseen by a person who is looking right at you. That is a very lonely thing, she said quietly. Yes. I know what that feels like. She said it simply without drama, the way you state a fact about weather. I have known it for quite some time. I know you have. He leaned forward slightly. That's why I'm here. She looked at him sharply. Not suspicious, something more complicated than suspicion. Something that wanted to believe and was afraid of what wanting cost. You have just ended an engagement, she said. 3 days ago. Your household is in an uproar. The county is constructing narratives, and you are sitting in my back sitting room telling me... She stopped. What exactly are you telling me? I'm telling you that I spent 11 months choosing the wrong woman because I was looking for the wrong things. And I spent 8 weeks after a carriage accident figuring out what I had actually been missing. And what I was missing. He held her gaze, held it steady. Was this. Exactly this. A room where nothing has to be performed. A conversation where the other person tells you the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. Someone who brings willow bark tea and doesn't wait to be thanked. She was very still. That is not a declaration, she said carefully. No, it's a statement of intent. What is the difference? A declaration asks nothing of you. A statement of intent is, he paused, honest about the fact that I am asking something. I am asking you to let me try, to let me be present in a way I wasn't before, to let me... He stopped himself because the sentence was in danger of becoming too much, too quickly, and she was the kind of woman who needed room. I am asking permission to call on you, regularly, properly. The silence went on long enough that he felt it in his chest. Then she said, the county will talk. Yes. They will say you came to me directly from Eleanor Pemberton. They will say I was waiting. They will say a great many unkind things. He didn't look away. And they will be wrong about most of them, and I won't be able to stop them from saying any of it. That's the honest answer. I see. She looked down at her hands. And you think I should accept that? I think you've been accepting far worse for years and getting nothing for it. His voice was witty, direct, not unkind. I think you deserve to want something and have someone fight for your right to want it. And I think—" he paused. "I think I'm the one who ought to be doing the fighting given the circumstances." She looked up at him, and there it was, what he'd been looking for. Not the almost smile, not the careful nothing, but something raw and unguarded, something that had probably been locked down so long she'd forgotten it was there. Her eyes were bright with something she was absolutely not going to let become tears. "You have a great deal to answer for," she said. "I know. Years of it. I know. You can't simply call on me twice and consider the account settled." "I'm not suggesting I can." Another silence. She drew a slow breath, held it, let it go. "Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said finally. "Those are the days I'm generally free. If you genuinely intend to call then. And bring something useful to discuss. I have no patience for men who call to be seen calling." She lifted her chin slightly. "And Nathaniel, if this is charity or guilt or some misplaced sense of obligation, tell me now. I would rather know now." He looked at her for a long moment. "It is not charity," he said. "It is not guilt. It is—" he searched for the right word and found it plain and exact— recognition, long overdue. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. "Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said again. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, he agreed. He rode home with his coat collar up against the March cold, and something in his chest that felt cautiously like the beginning of warmth. The county, as predicted, talked. The particular version that spread fastest was the one circulated by Harriet Eleanor Pemberton's cousin, nervous Harriet, who had retreated to Derbyshire, who had apparently not retreated so far that she missed the opportunity to reconstruct events in the most dramatic possible arrangement. By the following Wednesday, the working theory at every drawing room between Harrowfield and the neighboring county was that Nathaniel Whitmore had thrown over Eleanor Pemberton for the penniless companion she'd brought everywhere as social camouflage, which was simultaneously true, false, premature, and deeply satisfying to anyone who had ever found Eleanor Pemberton too perfectly composed for comfort. Eleanor Pemberton herself said nothing publicly. This was more devastating than any speech she could have made. Her silence was a closed door, and a closed door in a county this size told its own story. Eleanor Ashford, meanwhile, continued her Thursdays with Mrs. Garrett at the apothecary, her management of the Grange accounts, her attendance at church, her unobtrusive maintenance of everything that kept the small world of Ashford Grange functioning. She did not change her behavior to accommodate the gossip. She did not shrink. This surprised Nathaniel the first Tuesday he called, when he mentioned carefully that he'd heard the county was being generous with its opinions. "I know what they're saying," she said, pouring tea with her usual economy of motion. "I've known what they say about me for years. At least now they're saying something interesting." He almost choked on his tea. She almost smiled. Almost. Not quite. But closer than before. He came on Tuesdays and Thursdays as agreed. He brought things to discuss: the drainage project, which had encountered a complication he genuinely wanted her opinion on. A letter from his solicitor about a tenant dispute. A question about the kitchen garden that Mrs. Hargrove had raised, and that he'd realized midway through the conversation with his housekeeper was a question Eleanor Ashford could answer better than anyone he employed. She answered all of it, directly, specifically, without padding. Sometimes she disagreed with him. The first time she did flat, unapologetic, laying out her reasoning in 4 clear sentences that exposed a flaw in his plan that his own solicitor had missed. He sat across from her and felt something that was definitely not irritation, something closer to delight. "You're right," he said. "I know." She said it without gloating, but without false modesty either. "Write to Granville before Friday, or the window on the southern filing will have passed." He wrote to Granville before Friday. The southern filing was handled correctly. He told her the following Tuesday that Granville had commented on the improvement in the estate's approach to its eastern accounts over the past 3 years, without knowing he was complimenting the woman sitting across from Nathaniel's tea table. She was quiet for a moment. He said whoever had been advising the Pembroke family on their county holdings had done exceptional work. He had theories. None of them involved you. She looked into her cup. Of course they didn't. He knows now, Nathaniel said. She looked up sharply. I told him, Nathaniel said. I told him who had been managing those accounts, and I told him that in my considered opinion, the county had been benefiting from unpaid expertise for 3 years and ought to be aware of it. He paused. He was considerably impressed. He used the word exceptional twice more. Eleanor Ashford stared at him. You didn't need to do that, she said. No, but it needed doing. He met her eyes. Those are your words, I believe. Something shifted in her face. A small, seismic thing. She looked away toward the window, and for a moment she just breathed. When she looked back, her jaw was set in the particular way of a person who is absolutely not going to cry about something that deeply deserves crying about. That was... She stopped, started again. Thank you. You're welcome. A pause. He didn't think it was improper, a woman managing accounts. He thought it was remarkable. He asked if you'd be willing to consult on 2 other estates in the county. Nathaniel watched her face. I told him I would ask. She absorbed this. You would need to ask me, she said. Not answer for me. That is why I said I would ask. He held her gaze steadily. Would you be willing? The silence this time was different from all the previous silences. It was not the silence of a woman deciding whether to trust. It was the silence of a woman who had been handed unexpectedly and without condition the thing she had been quietly building toward for 3 years, without knowing whether anyone would ever notice. Yes, she said. I would be willing. The county noticed. Not immediately. Not loudly. But the kind of noticing that matters in small communities is not loud. It is cumulative, collected in small rooms by people who keep careful inventory of who speaks to whom and why. And what the county began to collect over those April Tuesdays and Thursdays was data that didn't fit any of its existing narratives. Nathaniel Whitmore, who had previously spent social occasions with his correct and beautiful fiancée on his arm, was now attending them alone, or not attending them at all, when the occasion was the kind that required performance, rather than actual conversation. And on the days he did appear, he had a habit of seeking out the least socially prominent person in the room and talking to them as though what they said mattered. He stopped doing the thing he had always done. The smooth social orbit, the correct conversation, the management of room position. He stopped, and the stopping was visible. Mrs. Cavendish, who had hosted every notable gathering in the county for 20 years, told her daughter in mid-April that Nathaniel Whitmore seemed to have had some kind of serious shock to his system, and that she wasn't sure whether to be concerned or relieved. Her daughter, who was 22 and had spent 3 seasons being invisible at county events, said she thought it might be the most interesting thing that had happened in Yorkshire in years. Meanwhile, at Ashford Grange, the back sitting room was becoming a room where real things happened. The day the shift became something Nathaniel could no longer pretend not to name was a Thursday in late April, when he arrived to find Eleanor not in the sitting room, but in the Grange's small study, surrounded by ledger books and correspondence with ink on her right hand, and her hair coming unpinned on one side, arguing with a letter. She didn't hear him come in. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, watching the furrow between her brows, the way she underlined something twice, and then wrote a note in the margin, the total absorption of a person engaged with something they care about. Then she sensed him and looked up, and for just a second before she could arrange herself, he saw her face completely unguarded. Open, startled, and alive. You're early, she said. I'm not. It's 2 o'clock. He came in, looked at the spread of books on the desk. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong. She pressed her lips together. The Pembroke Eastern tenant account has a discrepancy. It's been here for 8 months and I missed it, and I cannot find where it originated. Show me. She looked at him. You don't need to. Eleanor. He pulled the second chair up to the desk. Show me. A pause. Then she turned the ledger toward him, and they sat side by side, closer than was technically necessary. And she walked him through 3 columns of figures, while the afternoon light moved across the desk between them. He found it in 20 minutes. A transposition error in August, a 6 and a 9, switched in a quarterly total, cascading through 4 subsequent entries. There, he said, pointing. She leaned in to look, close enough that her shoulder was against his arm. She didn't move away. August. She stared at it. I checked August. The transposition is in the subtotal row, easy to look past. I checked August, she said again, with the tone of someone who does not make this kind of error, and is negotiating with the fact that she just did. You also managed these accounts alone for 3 years, Nathaniel said, without assistance, without acknowledgement, and without anyone checking your work. Finding one transposition error in 36 months of ledgers is not a failure. She turned her head to look at him. They were very close. He was aware of it acutely, physically aware of it, and from the slight catch in her breath, she was too. You're very different, she said, from who I thought you were. I'm trying to be. No. She shook her head slowly. Not trying, you are. This isn't effort, Nathaniel. This is you. A pause. I'm beginning to think the version of you I thought I knew was the performance, and this is the person. He held very still. That might be the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time, he said. I mean it literally, not kindly. But her voice was soft. I've been watching you for 6 weeks. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, and at the Cavendish gathering, and at church, and in the way you speak to your tenants, when you don't know I can see you. You are... She stopped, looked down at the ledger. You are a good man. I didn't know that. I'm sorry I didn't know that. The apology landed on him strangely. It was not an apology he had expected, not from her, not for this. He had been the one building a case for his own wrongness for weeks. He had not anticipated her apologizing for her blindness to his rightness. You had no reason to see it, he said. I gave you no reason. No. She turned another page in the ledger, not reading it, just doing something with her hands. But I had made up my mind about you, years ago. I had decided who you were, and I watched everything through that decision, and I should not have done that. What had you decided? She was quiet for a moment. That you were the kind of man who looks at women and sees categories, she said. Marriageable, pretty, well-connected, useful, and that I did not fit any category you would ever look at. She said it without self-pity, just clean and plain. And so I made myself small and useful elsewhere, and decided that was enough. And now? He asked. She closed the ledger, sat back, looked at him sideways. Now I'm finding that my categories were wrong, she said. Categories were wrong, she said, which is uncomfortable. I prefer being right. He laughed, a short, genuine sound surprised out of him. I know, he said. I've gathered that about you. Is it a problem? It's one of my favorite things about you. The words came out before he considered them. He heard them land in the air between them and watched her hear them, watched her absorb them, watched the careful stillness in her face do something complicated and unresolved. She stood up, began gathering the ledgers in the business-like way she did everything. I'll correct the August entries tonight, she said, and send a corrected summary to Granville in the morning. All right. And Nathaniel. She stopped her back to him, straightening a stack of papers on the desk. Yes. What you said to Granville, about the accounts. A breath. About recognizing the work. It mattered. It matters a great deal. I want you to know that, because I don't think I said it properly before, and I should have. He stood. You said it exactly properly. She turned around. They were standing 3 feet apart in a small room, and there was absolutely no reason for either of them to be as aware of those 3 feet as they were. I'll see you Tuesday, she said. Tuesday, he agreed. He was halfway to the door when she said, the discrepancy. You found it faster than I did. He stopped, turned. 2 pairs of eyes, he said simply. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment, in that measuring direct way that he had come to understand was the highest form of attention she offered. 2 pairs of eyes, she repeated quietly, as though she were noting something down somewhere, as though the phrase meant more than the words. I went home in the late afternoon light and thought about shoulders touching and the particular quality of a woman's voice when she said something real, and about how it was entirely possible to have spent a decade in the same county as someone and understood nothing at all about them, until a single honest conversation cracked the whole edifice open. And then everything after was different. What happened in May came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, the way the worst things usually do. Nathaniel was at the Cavendish gathering, the spring assembly. The one Mrs. Cavendish had organized with the thoroughness of a military campaign, when he heard his name from across the room in a tone that stopped him cold. It was Lord Pemberton, Eleanor Pemberton's uncle, a large, florid man of 60, with the particular air of someone who considered social influence a form of property, and who had just realized that a piece of his property had been rearranged without his permission. Whitmore, across the crowded room, loud enough to be heard by everyone who mattered, and several people who didn't. A word. There was no way to decline it gracefully. Nathaniel crossed the room, aware of the specific quality of the silence that formed around them, the county paying close attention while performing not to. Lord Pemberton did not waste time. "I want to know," he said, keeping his voice just below, carrying distance, just barely. "What exactly your intentions are toward Eleanor Ashford." "I intend to call on her," Nathaniel said, "regularly and properly. She has no fortune. I'm aware. No connections worth mentioning. No family position. She is a dependent of my household and has been for 6 years, and I will not." Pemberton stopped, recalibrated. "I will not have it suggested that I was keeping her for no one," Nathaniel said very quietly, very clearly, "is suggesting anything about you, sir. What is being suggested by my actions, which I stand behind, is that Eleanor Ashford is a woman of remarkable intelligence, exceptional capability, and considerable character, who has been overlooked by this county for entirely the wrong reasons, and I intend to rectify that." A silence. Very specific. The kind that means a room has collectively decided to listen. Pemberton's face went through several colors. "You broke my niece's engagement," he said. "Your niece and I came to a mutual decision. Don't play semantic games with me, Whitmore. You walked away from Eleanor Pemberton and walked directly to the companion she—" Pemberton stopped. His voice had been rising. He pulled it back down. "You will understand that this looks extraordinary." "It looks like a man who made a mistake and corrected it," Nathaniel said. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." The word inconvenience landed with precision. Nathaniel had chosen it deliberately, small, dismissive, the correct size for the argument Pemberton was making. Pemberton's jaw tightened. "I will not give my blessing," he said. "You are not her father," Nathaniel said quietly. "And she is 23 years old." The silence this time was absolute. Lord Pemberton stared at him. The whole room stared at them. Mrs. Cavendish across the space had stopped moving entirely, which in 20 years of observation Nathaniel had never seen her do. Pemberton straightened. "We are done here," he said. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "I believe we are." Pemberton walked away. Several people found reasons to look at the ceiling, the floor, their companions, anything but Nathaniel's face. Mrs. Cavendish, however, crossed the room with the unhurried momentum of a woman who has decided something. "Well," she said, arriving at his elbow and accepting a glass from a passing tray. "That was the most interesting thing I've seen at one of my assemblies in 15 years. She sipped. "I like her, you know, Miss Ashford. Always have. She remembered my cook's name last December when she'd only met her once in passing." She paused. "I find that tells you a great deal about a person." "It does," Nathaniel said. Mrs. Cavendish looked at him sideways. "She deserves someone who knows what he has." "I'm working on being that person," he said. "Good." She moved away. "Bring her to my June gathering, properly, on your arm. Let them all look and be done with it." He rode to Ashford Grange the next morning, a Tuesday on schedule, and told Eleanor everything. She listened with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still. When he got to the part about Pemberton, she looked down. When he got to the part about Mrs. Cavendish, she looked up. "She said that," she said, "about remembering her cook's name. She said it told her everything about a person." Eleanor Ashford was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I remember her cook's name because she lost her husband last November, and I thought someone should." Nathaniel looked at her. "That," he said, is exactly what I mean." She met his gaze, held it. "Lord Pemberton will make things difficult," she said. "Yes. This is not going to be easy." "No." He didn't soften it. She wouldn't want it softened. "It's going to be uncomfortable and loud, and people are going to say things that aren't fair, and some of them are going to say them directly to your face, and I can't prevent that." He held her gaze. "But I can be there when they do. If you'll let me." Eleanor Ashford sat with that for a long moment. Outside, a door opened somewhere in the Grange. Someone, a servant, probably moved through a corridor and was gone. The fire between them burned without drama. She reached over to the side table and picked up the letter she'd put down when he arrived yesterday, the one he'd noticed and not mentioned. She held it for a moment. "My father used to say," she said quietly, "that the bravest thing a person can do is want something they're not sure they'll be allowed to have." She set the letter down, looked at him. "I have not been particularly brave for a very long time." "You've been the bravest person in this county," he said. "You just did it quietly." She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the study, with their shoulders touching, measuring direct, and under all the careful steadiness, something alive. "All right," she said. 2 words. He felt them settle into the room like something solid. "All right," she said again, as though she were saying it to herself as much as to him. "Let them look. Let them look." 2 words. And Eleanor Ashford meant every syllable of them. Nathaniel carried those words home on a Thursday afternoon and turned them over for 3 days straight, not because they frightened him, but because they told him something critical about the woman who had said them. She had not said, "I'll try." She had not said perhaps, or "we'll see," or any of the dozen softening phrases a person uses when they want to agree without committing. She had said, "Let them look the way you say, bring it with a spine behind it, with years of quiet endurance, suddenly deciding it was done, being quiet." He arrived at Mrs. Cavendish's June gathering with Eleanor Ashford on his arm. He had asked her on the previous Thursday simply and directly, "Will you come to the Cavendish gathering with me properly, as my guest?" He had not dressed it up. She had looked at him for a long moment with that measuring stillness he now understood was not coldness, but calculation. Not of advantage, but of risk. The very specific risk of a woman deciding whether to step into a room full of people who have already made up their minds about her. "What time does it begin?" she asked. 7. "I'll be ready at 6:30. She was. She wore gray silk, not fashionable, not remarkable, not the kind of dress designed to make a statement, but she held herself inside it with a quality that Nathaniel could only describe as command. And the quiet kind. The kind that comes from a person who has nothing to prove and has finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. He offered his arm at the Grange's front door. She took it without hesitation. They walked into the Cavendish gathering at precisely 7 o'clock, and the room did exactly what rooms do when a thing happens that everyone expected and nobody quite believed would actually happen. It went briefly, collectively, still. Then Mrs. Cavendish cut through the silence like a ship through water, direct, unstoppable, entirely at ease. "Miss Ashford." She took Eleanor's free hand in both of hers. "How marvelous. You look well. Come, I want you to meet my daughter's new governess. She's attempting to organize the household library, and I told her you were the person to ask." And just like that, Eleanor Ashford was absorbed into the room, not as a scandal, but as a person, because Mrs. Cavendish had decided it would be so, and in this county, Mrs. Cavendish's decisions had the force of weather. Nathaniel watched Eleanor move through the room, watched her speak to the governess with the focused attention she gave to everything that mattered, watched her listen to old Colonel Davenport's story about his gout. With genuine patience, watched her exchange 3 sentences with Dr. Aldridge that made the doctor laugh unexpectedly and look at her with the expression of a man recalibrating something. She did not perform. She did not manage. She was simply entirely herself. It was the most remarkable thing he had ever watched happen at a social gathering. He was standing near the fireplace with a glass of claret he had mostly forgotten to drink when Eleanor Pemberton appeared at his shoulder. He had known she was in the room. He had clocked her arrival 20 minutes earlier and maintained a careful, respectful distance. He had not avoided her. Avoidance was its own statement, But he had not sought her out. She had come to him. That told him something. "She's good at it," Eleanor Pemberton said. Nathaniel turned to look at her. She was watching her cousin, her former companion, across the room, her face arranged in an expression of perfect neutrality that he now knew with precision was the face she wore when she was feeling something she had decided not to show. "Yes," he agreed. "She always was." A pause. Something shifted at the edge of her voice, not cracking, not quite, but present. "I used to wonder sometimes when I'd see her talk to people. The way they listened. The way she stopped. I told myself it was simply her manner. Quiet people seem deep because they speak rarely." She lifted her glass. "I was wrong about that." "You were," Nathaniel said, not unkindly. "So was I." Eleanor Pemberton looked at him. "Are you happy?" she asked. Just that. Clean and direct, the most direct thing he had heard her say in 11 months. He considered it honestly. "Not yet," he said. "But I believe I'm moving in the right direction." Something moved through her face. Not grief, something more complex. The expression of a woman doing a very private accounting. "She'll make you work for it," Eleanor Pemberton said. "She does not trust easily. You should know that." "I know that. She'll watch every move you make for months before she lets herself believe it's real." I know that too." A beat. "Good." She straightened. "Don't disappoint her, Nathaniel. She has been disappointed by too many people already." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head up, the picture of a woman exiting a scene on her own terms. He watched her go. Then he turned back to look at Eleanor Ashford across the room. She was looking back at him. She had seen the exchange with Eleanor Pemberton. He saw the question in her face from 20 feet away, the careful, watchful question of a woman who has learned to look for the catch. He crossed the room to her. "What did she say to you?" Eleanor asked quietly. "She told me not to disappoint you." He met her eyes. "And that you don't trust easily." A pause. "She said that—" "She did." Eleanor Ashford looked toward where her cousin had disappeared into the crowd. She said softly. "She was right. About all of it." "Yes." She looked back at him. "She usually is. That has always been the most exhausting thing about her." And there the real, almost smile, the one with warmth behind it. "Thank you for coming to find me." "I'll always come to find you," he said. "That's the point." She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she turned, said something brief to Dr. Aldridge, and slipped her hand back through Nathaniel's arm. They stayed at the gathering until 10. She talked to 17 people. He counted not because it mattered, but because he couldn't help noticing this was what she did. It was simply what she did. She entered a room and she made each person in it feel as though their particular concern was the most interesting thing in it. And she did it without artifice, without calculation, because she was genuinely interested. Every single time. In the carriage back to Ashford Grange, she was quiet. The good kind of quiet. The kind that means a person is full rather than empty. He let it stand for a mile, and then said, "How was it?" She thought for a moment. "Loud," she said, "but manageable." Another pause. "Mrs. Cavendish's daughter is terrified of her mother and is compensating by being excessively opinionated about curtain fabric. The governess is sharper than she's been allowed to demonstrate. And Colonel Davenport's gout is genuinely terrible, but he uses it as an excuse to avoid his sister-in-law, which I consider defensible." She paused. "How was it for you?" He looked at her in the dark carriage. "The best gathering I've attended in years," he said. "By a considerable margin." She looked out the window. He could see the edge of her face in the passing lamplight. "That is very good company to have," she said quietly, after a long time of not having it. He did not reach for her hand. But he wanted to, and he thought she knew it, and the knowledge of it sat between them in the carriage like something warm and patient and real. The summer moved. Tuesdays and Thursdays became the architecture of his week. Not in the way that routine becomes rote, but in the way that something structural becomes load-bearing. He noticed on weeks when something intervened, and a Tuesday was lost, a specific quality of wrong-footedness that had nothing to do with the appointment missed and everything to do with the conversation it contained. He told her this one Thursday in July. "You notice when it's gone," she said with the air of someone confirming a hypothesis. "I do too. It's disorienting." Is that a good sign or a bad one? It's simply true. She poured more tea. "I've spent years designing my life so that nothing is load-bearing, so that nothing can be taken away and leave a gap." She set the pot down. "It's an efficient way to avoid being hurt. It is also, I have concluded, a very dull way to live." "What changed your mind?" She gave him the sideways look. "You arrived on a Tuesday with drainage reports and actual questions." He laughed. She didn't quite laugh, but the sound she made, short and warm, was close enough to the real thing that it landed on him the same way. What happened on the third Tuesday of July arrived without announcement, as the things that change everything tend to do. He came to Ashford Grange at 2 o'clock. Mrs. Pembroke, the Colonel's wife, met him in the corridor with an expression that told him before she spoke that something was wrong. "She's in the garden," Mrs. Pembroke said. "There's been a letter from Lord Pemberton's solicitor." He found Eleanor at the back of the garden, standing very still with a letter in her hand. She had not been crying. She would not cry about this. He understood immediately. Not in front of anyone, probably not even alone. She had trained that particular response out of herself years ago. But her face, when she heard his step and turned, was stripped of everything careful. Just Eleanor. Unmanaged, unguarded, the face of a woman who has received a blow she didn't fully see coming. "Pemberton is withdrawing my allowance," she said. "As of September. He says his solicitor says," she looked down at the letter, "that as my position in the household has changed, and as my future circumstances are, the phrase is yet to be determined, he cannot in good conscience continue the arrangement." Nathaniel stood still for a moment. "He's putting pressure on you," he said. "Yes." Flat. Precise. "He's deciding that if he removes your security, you'll—" Nathaniel stopped. The full architecture of it assembled in his mind in a single cold second. "He thinks you'll pull back. From this. From me." She looked up at him. "Or you will, when the situation becomes inconvenient." Her voice was steady. Too steady. The steadiness of a woman bracing. "It's a reasonable calculation from his position. I am a dependent of his household with no income of my own. If he withdraws support, I have very limited options. Staying becomes considerably more complicated." She folded the letter. "He's done it neatly." "He's done it wrongly," Nathaniel said. Something crossed her face, not quite hope, not quite warning. "Nathaniel, I'm going to say something," he said. "And I need you to hear it as what it actually is, not as a reaction to his letter, not as a rescue, not as management." He held her gaze. "I need you to hear it as what I've been moving toward since a Thursday in March, when you walked out of a library, and I stood in it alone, and thought about what it means to be genuinely interested in a person." She went very still. "Eleanor." He said it the way he'd been learning to say it, plainly, without ceremony, without the orchestrated weight that men put on important moments to make themselves sound decisive. Just her name, simple, like it was simply hers. "I want to marry you." That is not a response to Pemberton's letter. That is something I've known for 8 weeks and have been very imperfectly working toward saying. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Not stunned, not frightened, but full, completely full, the way a room gets when something real has been said in it and the air hasn't adjusted yet. She looked at him. 8 weeks, she said. "Approximately. And you didn't say it." "I was afraid you'd say no." She stared at him. "You were Nathaniel Whitmore, who told Lord Pemberton to his face that he was not my father, and stood in the middle of a crowded room and said it. That was considerably easier." He took one step toward her. "Pemberton's opinion of me is something I can manage. Your opinion of me is something I actually care about. Those are not the same situation." She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she looked down at the letter in her hand. Then back up at him. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. Not the Nathaniel Whitmore of February, who thought he knew what he wanted and organized his life accordingly. Not a man acting out of guilt or, Eleanor, Let me finish. Her voice was firm. I need you to understand that I am not an easy person. I am direct to the point of inconvenience. I have opinions about things that women of my position are not supposed to have opinions about. I will argue with you when I think you're wrong, and I will be right often enough to be annoying. I keep accounts at midnight. I walk to the village on Thursdays regardless of the weather. I remember everyone's cook's name and nobody's title. And I will— Her voice steadied. I will require actual honesty, not performed honesty, not managed transparency. I have lived with the performance of things for too long, and I will not build a life on it. He held her gaze through all of it. I know, he said quietly. Every part of that. I know. You say that now. I say it having spent 4 months watching you be exactly all of those things, he said. And I say it having chosen every Tuesday and Thursday to come back. Not because it was comfortable or easy, because it was real. And I have not had enough real in my life. He took another step. I want the arguments. I want the midnight accounts. I want to be told when I'm wrong specifically, and with evidence which I suspect will be regularly. He held out his hand, not a grand gesture just offered. Just there. I want you, fully, as you are. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She was doing the calculation, he could see it. The risk assessment that was simply how her mind worked, and that he had come to understand was not a lack of feeling, but the opposite. A person who feels too much and has learned to think before she acts on it. She took his hand. Not dramatically. Just took it, folded her fingers around his, held on. Yes, she said. But I need to tell you something first. Something I should have told you weeks ago. He waited. The night after you spoke to Granville about the accounts. She was looking at their joined hand. The night you told Granville, who had been managing the books. I sat in this garden for an hour after dark. Just sat here. She paused. And I thought, this is what it feels like. To be seen. I had forgotten that it felt like anything. I had talked myself into believing it didn't matter. She looked up at him. It mattered enormously. It has always mattered enormously. And I was terrified of how much. He understood then fully, in the specific way that understanding arrives when it's complete, rather than partial, why she had been so careful. Why every step had been weighed, every word measured. Not because she felt little, because she felt so much that being wrong about it would be catastrophic. She was the bravest person in Yorkshire. She had just done it so quietly, nobody had noticed. I know, he said for the third time that day, and this time it carried everything. She exhaled a long, slow breath, and her hand stayed in his. The weeks between the proposal and the formal announcement were not, as Nathaniel might once have expected, weeks of smooth sailing. Lord Pemberton made his displeasure known through a sequence of social maneuvers so precise that they almost earned Nathaniel's professional admiration, almost. He arranged for 3 separate county gatherings to conflict with whatever event Nathaniel and Eleanor might reasonably have attended. He allowed certain inaccurate stories to circulate about Eleanor's family finances without actively promoting them. He did not at any point say anything that could be directly addressed, which was, Nathaniel acknowledged the work of a man who understood how power operated. Eleanor noticed every move. Of course she did. What surprised Nathaniel was how little it affected her. He asked her about it on a Tuesday in August, when the latest maneuver, a dinner party to which half the county had been invited, and from which Nathaniel and Eleanor had been conspicuously excluded, was fresh. It bothers you less than I expected, he said. It bothers me exactly as much as it should, she answered. Which is some. Not overwhelming. I've been excluded from things my entire adult life, Nathaniel. Lord Pemberton doing it deliberately is almost less offensive than the county doing it through simple indifference. He stared at her. That, he said slowly, is the saddest and most defiant thing I have ever heard. It's practical. Everything with you is practical. Everything with me works, she said with the particular precision of a woman who has earned the right to that statement, and held his gaze until he laughed. He was still laughing when Mrs. Hargrove knocked and entered with the news that Sir Alan Whitmore, Nathaniel's elder cousin, who held a baronetcy and a considerable opinion of his own, had arrived from London and was asking for Nathaniel in the front hall. Nathaniel stopped laughing. Eleanor saw his face change. "Who is Sir Alan?" "A complication." He stood. "He disapproves of almost everything I've done since February, and he has been very patient about waiting to say so in person." "Shall I leave?" "Absolutely not," he said, and meant it. And the slight shift in her expression surprised, then settled, told him she had heard it the way he intended it. They went to the front hall together. Sir Alan Whitmore was 62, lean, silver-haired, and possessed of the specific authority of a man who had spent 40 years being right about most things, and had concluded from this that he was right about everything. He looked at Eleanor with an assessment so rapid and thorough that it was almost impressive. "Miss Ashford," he said, "not unkind, not warm, surgical." "Sir Alan," she answered, equally surgical. He looked at Nathaniel. "I've come," Sir Alan said, "because your mother asked me to talk sense into you, and because I've been hearing things from Yorkshire that concern me, and because—" He paused, and something shifted in his face. Something that might, if it existed at larger scale, have been called uncertainty. "And because I want to understand what you're actually doing before I decide whether to oppose it." "That's fairer than I expected," Nathaniel said. "I'm a fair man." Sir Alan's gaze moved back to Eleanor. "Miss Ashford, I've had inquiries made. Granville speaks well of you. Aldridge speaks well of you. Mrs. Cavendish speaks very well of you, which I find more significant than either Granville or Aldridge, since Mrs. Cavendish speaks well of almost no one." A beat. "Lord Pemberton does not speak well of you. Lord Pemberton has financial reasons to prefer I remain a dependent of his household," Eleanor said. "I'd encourage you to weigh his account accordingly." Sir Alan blinked. He turned to Nathaniel. "She's direct." "Yes." "Refreshing." He looked back at Eleanor. "Pemberton says you have no fortune." "I have no fortune," she confirmed. "He says your family connection is negligible. My father was a viscount who died in debt. The connection is technically present and practically worthless." She held his gaze. "If you're assessing whether I am a suitable match for Whitmore Hall, Sir Alan, I can give you the honest accounting directly, without the social performance, which will save us both considerable time." Sir Alan stared at her. Then he turned to Nathaniel with an expression that Nathaniel could not entirely decode, but that contained somewhere in its layers something that might have been approval. "Sit down," Sir Alan said to both of them. "I'll have the full accounting then, from both of you." He settled into the chair by the fire. "And someone send for coffee. This is clearly going to take some time." It took 2 hours. Eleanor gave Sir Alan the honest accounting she had promised: finances, family position, social standing, all of it in clear sentences, without apology or embellishment. Nathaniel gave him the other accounting. February the Hill, the 8 weeks of watching and learning, and beginning to understand what he'd been missing, 4 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays, the specific and irreversible nature of what had developed. Sir Alan listened to all of it without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them aimed at the actual substance rather than the surface. When they were done, he was quiet for a moment. "Pemberton will not come around," he said finally. "I know," Nathaniel said. "The county will require a year to normalize its opinion." "I know that too." Sir Alan looked at Eleanor. "How do you feel about a difficult year?" She met his eyes calmly. "I have had 6 difficult years. One more with better company seems very manageable." The corner of Sir Alan's mouth did something that in a less contained man would have been a smile. "Very well," he said. "I came to talk sense into you." He picked up his coffee. "I find you've apparently managed that yourself." He looked at Eleanor. "Miss Ashford, I will not oppose this. I want you to know that is not a small statement from a man of my position." "I understand that," Eleanor said. "Thank you, Sir Alan. Thank me by making sure he doesn't revert." The almost smile again. "He has a tendency when things are comfortable to stop paying attention. I've watched it for 30 years. Nathaniel opened his mouth. "He's not wrong," Eleanor said beside him with perfect calm. Sir Alan actually laughed, a short, genuine sound, surprised out of a man who had not expected to be surprised. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. She was looking at Sir Alan with the focused attention she gave to everything she actually respected. She was already, he realized, figuring out who Sir Alan was, filing it away, building the real picture rather than the social one. She was already doing what she did, what she had always done, seeing people. He sat beside her in the warm room with the fire going, and Sir Alan drinking his coffee, and the whole difficult, particular, utterly unromantic weight of a real future assembling itself in the space around them. And he thought, this is it. Not the carriage, not the whisper, not the moment on the hill. This. A room. 2 chairs. A woman who argues and accounts and notices cooks' names and demands actual honesty. This was what he had been failing to find for 31 years. This was what had been there the entire time. Sir Alan left Whitmore Hall on a Wednesday morning, and the house felt different after he was gone. Not emptier, but somehow clarified the way air feels after a storm has moved through and taken all the pressure with it. Nathaniel stood at the front door watching the carriage until it disappeared, and then he went back inside and sat at his desk and did something he had not done in months. He wrote to his mother. Not the letters he had been writing, the careful managed correspondence that said everything was fine, that the county situation was being handled, that she need not concern herself. He wrote the real letter. The one that started with, "I made a serious mistake in February, and I've spent 6 months correcting it," and ended with, "I am going to marry Eleanor Ashford, and I am asking you to trust my judgment for the first time in perhaps a decade, and I understand if that takes time." He sealed it before he could reconsider. He sent it. Then he went to find Mrs. Hargrove because there were things about Whitmore Hall that needed to change before September, and Mrs. Hargrove was the only person who knew where everything was, and what everything cost, and which things mattered, and which things were simply legacy, stubbornness, dressed up as tradition. "The East Garden," he said when he found her in the linen room. Eleanor Miss Ashford mentioned once that the East Garden had been a kitchen garden 30 years ago, before my father turned it into something decorative. He paused. "I'd like to restore it." Mrs. Hargrove looked at him over a stack of folded tablecloths. "Your father spent considerable money on that garden, sir." "I know. It's also entirely useless, and she could do something real with it." A pause. "It would take the better part of a season to turn over." "Then we should start immediately." Mrs. Hargrove set down the tablecloths with the careful deliberateness of a woman registering something. "I'll speak to the head groundsman this afternoon," she said. Then, without any change in tone, "She'll want to choose what's planted. She'll have opinions. I'm counting on it." Mrs. Hargrove made a sound that was technically agreement and actually something much warmer. "I'll hold the planning until she can be consulted then." She picked the tablecloths back up. "Will that be Tuesday or Thursday?" "Thursday," Nathaniel said. "Tell her it's urgent estate business. She responds better to that than to gestures." "I know," Mrs. Hargrove said with the serenity of a woman who had been observing Eleanor Ashford at Whitmore Hall for months and had her own opinions about the whole business. "I'll send word this afternoon." He was almost out the door when she added, "Sir." He turned. "Your father's portrait. The one in the east corridor." She kept her voice neutral. "It needs to come down. The frame is damaged. It should go to the restorer before winter." He looked at her. He understood precisely what she was telling him, that the east corridor which led to the East Garden was going to need to stop being a monument to the past and start being a passage toward something living. See to it," he said. She nodded once and returned to her linen. Eleanor arrived on Thursday at 2 o'clock, and Nathaniel met her in the entry hall, which was different in itself. He had never met her in the entry hall before, always let her be brought through by Mrs. Hargrove, as though he needed the buffer of formality to manage the weight of wanting to see her. "You said urgent estate business," she said by way of greeting, unwrapping a traveling cloak that she handed to the footman without looking. "I came directly. What's wrong with the south pasture?" "Nothing is wrong with the south pasture." She stopped, looked at him. "Then what?" "Come with me." He turned toward the east corridor. She followed with the specific quality of wariness of a person who has learned that surprises come in 2 varieties and doesn't yet know which this is. Through the corridor, the portrait was gone. the hook still visible where the frame had hung for 40 years, and through the door at the end into the east garden. He heard her go still behind him. He turned. She was standing just outside the door, looking at the turned earth at the groundsman working the far beds at the bare framework of what had been an ornamental border and was becoming something else entirely. Her face was doing the thing it had done the night he told her about speaking to Granville, stripped of the careful management, just Eleanor receiving something unexpected. "You're restoring it," she said. "I'm starting to. Mrs. Hargrove said you'd want to choose what's planted." A silence. She stepped forward into the garden, moving across the turned earth with the deliberate step of someone assessing, hands clasped behind her back, head slightly forward. He recognized the posture. It was the same posture she wore over a ledger book at midnight. Total concentration. She stopped at the center of the space and turned back to look at him. "Beds along the south wall for the herbs," she said. "They need the sun. Root vegetables in the north sections, better drainage. The central space can hold soft fruits if we trellis it correctly. And I want a cutting garden in the northeast corner. Not for the house." She paused. "For Mrs. Garrett at the apothecary. She's been buying from a supplier in Leeds, and the quality is inconsistent." He stared at her. She stared back. "Is that too much?" "That is exactly enough," he said. The almost smile broke open into a real one, full, unguarded, surprised out of her by the plainness of his answer. It lasted 3 seconds. Then she pressed her lips together and turned back to the garden. But the warmth of it stayed in the air between them, like something that had decided to take up permanent residence. "I'll draw up a plan by Tuesday," she said. "We can review it with the groundsman together." Thursday. "Tuesday. If we don't begin the south wall beds before the end of August, we lose the season." "Tuesday," he agreed. Behind them, a groundsman who had been carefully not listening coughed and moved to a different section of the garden. They spent an hour in the east garden, not walking decorously, but moving through it the way two people move through a problem they're solving together, stopping here to discuss drainage, stopping there to pace out dimensions, disagreeing twice about the central layout and resolving it in both cases by the person who was right acknowledging it without ceremony, and the person who was wrong doing the same. It was, Nathaniel thought, the best hour he had spent in that garden in 30 years. It was possibly the best hour the garden had seen in that same time. When they went back inside, Mrs. Hargrove had tea waiting in the small parlor. Not the formal parlor, the small one. The one that was becoming without any explicit designation their room, and they sat down across from each other and drank it in the comfortable silence of two people who have been talking all afternoon and don't need to fill the pause. Then Eleanor said, "I had a letter from my cousin this morning." He waited. "From Eleanor Pemberton." She set her cup down. "She's accepted an offer. From a Mr. Charles Hadfield out of Derbyshire. He's 40, a widower, sensible income, no pretensions." She paused. "She says he is practical and kind and knows what he's getting." She sounded, another pause. She sounded genuinely at ease with it. "Good," Nathaniel said, and meant it. She said something else. Eleanor looked at her hands. "She said she hopes we are happy." Those were the exact words. "I hope you are genuinely happy, both of you." She underlined genuinely. A beat. "I think it was an apology." "For what?" "For the years of making me invisible. For taking the accounts I kept and never asking how they got so good. For," she stopped, "for bringing me everywhere as furniture and never seeing me as company." She folded the letter which he had been holding without realizing. "I've been angry at her for years, quietly. The kind of angry you don't let yourself say because it's not convenient, and because she was never actually cruel, and because I had nowhere else to go." "That kind of anger is the worst kind," Nathaniel said. "Yes." She looked up at him. "And I think I'm not anymore. Angry." She said it with the air of discovering something mid-sentence. "I'm not. It's strange. I thought I would be for much longer." "What changed?" She looked at him for a long moment with that direct measuring gaze that he had come to understand was Eleanor Ashford's equivalent of saying everything. "I got something I wanted," she said simply. "It's difficult to stay angry when you've got something to be busy being grateful for." He held her gaze. "That is the most pragmatic romantic statement I've ever heard," he said. "I am a pragmatic woman." "You're a remarkable one." She looked away toward the window, the way she did when something landed, and she needed a moment to absorb it. Then she looked back. "I'm working on accepting that," she said. "The remarkable part. I've called myself practical for so long that remarkable sounds like a category mistake." "Work faster," he said with the quiet firmness that she had once told him in a moment of unguarded honesty was the version of him she trusted most. "We have a garden to plan." She laughed properly. The full, real sound, the one she'd been giving him more freely in recent weeks, the one that still had the power to stop him cold with the simple fact of it. Then she reached across the table and picked up the planning notes she'd started on the ride over. "South wall," she said, spreading the paper between them. "Tell me what the current drainage slope is. I need exact numbers." He told her. They bent over the notes together. The afternoon went on. What happened 3 weeks later was the thing Nathaniel had not prepared for, because it came from the direction he had least expected. His mother arrived, Lady Whitmore, 61 years old, small, sharp-eyed, possessing of the specific authority of a woman who had managed a large estate through 30 years of widowhood. While everyone around her assumed she needed managing, arrived on a Monday afternoon without notice, which was entirely in character, and asked to be shown directly to wherever Eleanor Ashford was, which was not. Nathaniel was not home. He was at the South Pasture with the drainage engineer addressing the very real problem of the South Pasture drainage that had nothing to do with Eleanor, and everything to do with the estate's autumn water table. Mrs. Hargrove faced with Lady Whitmore on the front step, and Miss Ashford in the east garden with dirt on her sleeve, made a decision with the courage of a woman who has been in service for 22 years and knows what she's looking at. She took Lady Whitmore to the east garden. Eleanor heard the footsteps on the path and turned expecting a groundsman. She found a small woman in traveling clothes regarding the turned beds with an expression of sharp, rapid assessment. Eleanor did not know who she was for approximately 4 seconds. Then she knew exactly who she was. She straightened, pulled off one garden glove, looked at Lady Whitmore directly. "Lady Whitmore," she said, "I'm Eleanor Ashford. I would offer you my hand, but I have soil on it." Lady Whitmore looked at the hand, looked at Eleanor's face, looked at the garden. "What are you planting here?" she asked. "Herbs on the south wall, root vegetables along the north beds, soft fruits in the center, a cutting garden in the northeast corner for the apothecary in the village." The apothecary. Her supplier in Leeds is unreliable. She's been struggling with her medicinal stock for 2 seasons. Lady Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "My late husband spent £400 on this garden," she said, making it look like something from a French catalogue. "I know," Eleanor said. "It was very handsome. It also grew nothing, fed no one, and served no purpose that a good painting couldn't have served more cheaply." Silence. A groundsman 20 feet away became extremely interested in a section of earth. Then Lady Whitmore said, "Walk with me." They walked for 40 minutes. Nathaniel arrived home to find his mother and his intended sitting on the stone bench at the garden's edge. Eleanor's planting notes spread between them. His mother making annotations in the margins, in a handwriting he recognized from childhood as the handwriting she used when she was genuinely engaged with something, rather than politely tolerating it. He stopped in the garden doorway. Neither of them looked up. "The northeast corner is too small," his mother was saying. "If you're supplying the apothecary, you need twice the space. Push the cutting garden west and reduce the fruit section by 1/3. The fruit section feeds the kitchen through winter," Eleanor said. "Then double the south wall herb beds and take the space from the ornamental border." "There is no ornamental border." "There will be one if I know my son." A pause. "He'll want to put something pretty at the entry. He always does." Eleanor looked up and saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway. A beat of silence. Then to his mother without looking away from him. "I'll handle the ornamental border." Lady Whitmore looked up and followed Eleanor's gaze. "Nathaniel," she said, "you're late." "I was at the South Pasture." He crossed the garden. "I didn't know you were coming. I didn't know until yesterday." She looked at him with the expression he had been receiving since childhood, The one that stripped 40 years off both of them and made him feel 12 and 40 simultaneously. I read letter 4 times. A pause. Then I read it a 5th time and decided I needed to come and see for myself what on earth had gotten into you. And she looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back at her steadily, not performing anything, not managing the moment, just being exactly who she was. And Lady Whitmore said, I find that you have, for the first time in 31 years, made a decision I could not have made better myself. She turned to Eleanor. Miss Ashford, I would like if you're willing to stay for a week. I have opinions about the north beds. You're welcome to stay, Eleanor said, as long as you understand that I have final say on the planting scheme. Lady Whitmore stared at her. Nathaniel held very still. Good God, his mother said with the tone of a woman who has been waiting decades for someone to say exactly that. Finally. The announcement appeared in the county papers on the 1st of September. Nathaniel had written it himself. No solicitor, no formal template, no managed language. Just plain words, the kind Eleanor had taught him by example over months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mr. Nathaniel Whitmore of Whitmore Hall announces his engagement to Miss Eleanor Ashford of Ashford Grange. The marriage will take place in November. That was all. No embellishment. No performance. The county, of course, had been aware for months, and the announcement settled into the general conversation, the way a stone settles into water that has already accepted the disturbance, with a final definitive ripple, and then stillness. Lord Pemberton said nothing publicly. His solicitor sent a formal note of acknowledgement. Eleanor read it, set it on the side table, and returned to the account book she was reviewing. Sir Alan sent a letter that contained 3 sentences, all of them positive and none of them flowery, which from Sir Alan was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Mrs. Cavendish sent a dinner invitation for the following week, addressed to both of them, which was the most significant social communication of the entire autumn. Eleanor Pemberton, soon to be Mrs. Hadfield. The papers noted with a November wedding of her own scheduled in Derbyshire, sent a small package the week of the announcement. Inside was a book, a volume of household management, well used, the margins full of careful notes in Eleanor Pemberton's precise hand. Inside the front cover, written simply without explanation. You always knew more about running a house than I let you demonstrate. Now demonstrate it properly. Eleanor Ashford held the book for a long time. Nathaniel found her at the desk in the small parlor, the book open in her hands, not reading it exactly, just holding it. He didn't ask. He sat down across from her and waited. After a moment she said, She kept notes about the menus. She kept notes about everything. I didn't know that. Her voice was quiet. I thought she did it all by instinct, by the same instinct that made everything look effortless. She turned a page. She worked at it. She worked very hard at it and never showed anyone. That sounds familiar, Nathaniel said. Eleanor looked up at him. Yes, she said softly. I suppose it does. A pause. We were not so different, she and I. We just wanted different things, and went about hiding it differently. What did you hide? She looked at him with the full direct gaze, no almost smile. The real thing. The face of a woman who has decided that this person has earned the unguarded version. That I wanted exactly this, she said. A real house, a real life. Someone who asked me real questions and stayed for the real answers. I hid it because wanting things you don't believe you can have it's the most painful kind of wanting. It's easier to call yourself practical and say you don't need it. And now, he asked. She closed the book, set it down, looked at him across the width of the small parlor table that had become over 5 months the geography of everything important. Now, she said, I am apparently planning a November wedding and arguing with your mother about north bed drainage and consulting for 2 county estates and managing a kitchen garden and trying very hard to accept that wanting something and getting it is allowed. She tilted her head slightly. It's taking some adjustment. How is it going? Slowly, she said. But improving. The real smile, the full one, the one that had made him stop cold the first time she gave it freely, and had not yet lost that power. Ask me again in a year. "I'll ask you every year," he said. She held his gaze. "Good," she said. "I'm going to hold you to that." The wedding was on a Thursday in November, which Eleanor had insisted upon the ceremony falling on a Thursday. Was, she said, simply logical, since Thursday was already established as a day when things that mattered happened. Nathaniel had not argued because she was right, and because by now he understood that her rightness was not a thing to resist, but a thing to build on. The ceremony was small. Mrs. Cavendish attended, Dr. Aldridge attended, Sir Alan attended, and sat very straight and made a face of total composure that Nathaniel recognized as the face he made when he was moved and refusing to show it. Lady Whitmore sat in the front row and wore the expression of a woman who has gotten exactly what she thought was best and is permitting herself quietly to be satisfied. Mrs. Hargrove was in the back with Mrs. Garrett from the apothecary, who was there because Eleanor had asked her specifically the way she asked for everything directly, without embellishment, as though it were simply obvious that Mrs. Garrett ought to be there. Mrs. Garrett had cried getting dressed that morning, which she told no one. Colonel Pembroke attended and was confused about the seating arrangement, but warmly delighted throughout, and told 3 people independently that he'd always known Eleanor was remarkable, which was not precisely true, but was said with such genuine conviction that it became a kind of truth. Lord Pemberton did not attend. Nobody mentioned it. When Nathaniel took Eleanor's hand at the altar, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just took it the way he had taken it in the garden that April afternoon, simply as though her hand were already a familiar thing. He felt her fingers close around his with a steadiness that he recognized. It was the same steadiness she brought to the accounts at midnight, to the difficult conversation, to the honest answer when the easy one was available. She was steady all the way through. He said the words. She said the words. They were plain words, the kind that meant what they said without decoration, which was entirely correct for 2 people who had both spent too long surrounded by the decorated kind. Afterward, in the carriage back to Whitmore Hall. Their Whitmore Hall, a detail that still had the quality of something not quite real, except that it was completely real. Eleanor sat beside him rather than across from him, which was new, and held his hand without appearing to notice. She was doing it, which told him the holding had already become instinct. She was looking out the window. "Tuesday," she said. "What about it?" "I need to review the estate accounts with Granville on Tuesday. The East Farm lease renewal is overdue and he's been avoiding it." She paused. "And the kitchen garden final plan needs to go to the groundsman by Tuesday, or we lose the February planting window." He looked at her. "We've been married for approximately 3 hours," he said. "The February planting window does not care," she said, still looking out the window, but her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was trying not to smile. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." She turned her head and looked at him full direct, the gaze that saw everything, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder briefly, easily, the way you lean against something you are certain will hold. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For pretending to be unconscious." The real smile right against his shoulder where he could feel rather than see it. "On that hill, in the snow, for deciding to stay still and listen." A pause. "I think about it sometimes. What would have happened if you had simply opened your eyes?" He thought about it too. He had thought about it many times. If he had opened his eyes on that hillside, if he had made his presence known, sat up, accepted the help, gone home, and recovered and married Eleanor Pemberton in June, with the county watching, what would the year have looked like? A correct life. A managed life. A life in which he would have spent every subsequent year aware somewhere at the back of his mind that the woman beside him had looked at his bleeding body and thought about real estate. And Eleanor Ashford would have continued to stand in corners and manage the books and bring willow bark tea to people who forgot to say thank you. "I don't regret it," he said. "Not one moment of it." "Neither do I," she said. "That's the strangest part. I should regret the years before it. 6 years of furniture-level existence. But I find I can't quite manage the regret because—" She paused. "Because all of it got me here. And here is considerably better than anywhere else I've been." He turned his head and pressed his lips to her hair briefly, the way you do when the gesture is too small and too large simultaneously for any other form. She stayed against his shoulder. The carriage moved through the November cold, through the fields that were his and hers, and both of theirs, past the north beds and the south pasture and the east garden that was dormant now, but would break open in the spring with everything she had planned for it. They arrived at Whitmore Hall as the afternoon light was going. Mrs. Hargrove had the lamps lit throughout, and a fire in every room that mattered, and she met them at the door with the contained satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting 15 years to watch this particular house become what it was always capable of being. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. Eleanor stepped through the front door of Whitmore Hall and stood for a moment in the entry hall with its warm light and its missing portrait hook and its total unperformed reality. She looked at Mrs. Hargrove. "How is your sister's hip?" she asked. Mrs. Hargrove smiled, the kind she reserved for things that genuinely earned it. "Better," she said. "Considerably better. Thank you for asking." "Good," Eleanor said. "I'll want to speak to you about the spring household schedule tomorrow, and the East Garden planning notes need to go to the groundsman by Tuesday." "I'll arrange it, ma'am." Eleanor nodded, handed over her cloak, walked into the house. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her go. Watched her move through Whitmore Hall with the purposeful ease of a woman who knows exactly where she's going and exactly what needs doing when she gets there. Watched her pause at the parlor door, push it open, glance in with the assessing eye of a person already cataloging what works and what needs changing. She had been here hundreds of times. Today, it was different. Today, she was not the woman brought along as company. Today, she was the woman who lived here, who would run the accounts and plan the garden and argue about the north beds and remember everyone's name and notice which way he rubbed his eye when he was tired for the rest of their lives. Mrs. Hargrove appeared at his elbow with the quiet authority of her 22 years. "She's going to change everything," she said. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "She is." He stepped inside. The door of Whitmore Hall closed behind him, solid, final. The sound of a house that has finally understood what it is for. And Nathaniel Whitmore standing in the warm light of the life. He had almost missed, thought of a February hillside, a broken axle, and a whisper he was never meant to hear. He thought of all the things that had to go wrong precisely, and in sequence, to bring him to this exact moment. He had spent 31 years looking for the perfect woman to stand beside his name. It took one carriage accident, one whispered truth, and one woman who noticed how he rubbed his eye when he was tired to teach him that the life worth building was not the one that looked right from the outside. It was the one that was real when nobody was watching. And this one was real. Every